Harry and Joanna appear to have achieved the life most people dream of after 28. After years of marriage, they lived in a lovely suburban home surrounded by the memories they had created with their two children, Mark, now 25, and Lisa, now 20. Their house overflowed with indications of vitality. Framed photos from family holidays, well-worn furniture from years of shared laughter, and the perfume of Joanna's cooking that always seemed to linger like a loving embrace. But recently, Harry had observed a difference in Joanna's normally colorful and happy appearance. To be retreating within herself. Her laughter, once a mainstay in their home, had become scarce. She would sit gazing out the window in the living room. Her mind appeared to be elsewhere at first. Harry attributed it to an empty nest. After all, Mark had left for a job in Denver, and Lisa was preoccupied with her college life. He assumed Joanna simply missed the everyday commotion of raising children. But as the weeks passed, months, he couldn't get the impression that something deeper was troubling her. "Joe, is everything okay?" he questioned. Evening, his voice pleasant yet probing. "You've been silent lately," she grinned softly, but did not meet his gaze. "I'm okay, Harry. Just a little tired, that's all." But Harry weren't convinced by the circles beneath her eyes and the distant look. Her once sparkling blue eyes said volumes. She was hiding something, but what? Harry returned home in the evening to find Joanna particularly joyful. She had prepared Harry's favorite dinner was roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, and she hummed quietly while setting the table. I had a flicker of hope that she was finally getting out of her funk, but something didn't fit right with Joanna's demeanor. Swings had gotten more pronounced on some days. She was distant and moody. On others, she was suddenly effervescent, as if she were on top of the world. It was during these when Harry detected a worrying pattern. She frequently came home late and answered his queries vaguely. "Excuses, just running errands," she'd say, or "I stopped by the bookshop yet, Harry." He couldn't recall the last time he'd seen her with a new book. One night, when Joanna said she was meeting an old friend for coffee, Harry offered to drop her off. Her reaction was swift and uncommon. She bristled. "That's not." She hastily answered, "I'll just take my car." And that was when the gnawing suspicion began to take root. Was not a man prone to envy and paranoia, but there was something about Joanna's sudden demand for independence that didn't feel right. His senses told him she wasn't telling the truth, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions after. They had spent nearly 3 decades together, and surely she would tell him if something was wrong, and doubt stared at him like a relentless splinter. The woman. Harry couldn't shake the notion that their marriage was on the verge of ending. At first, Harry attempted to tell himself that it was nothing. She was going through a midlife phase or simply needed a little space, but the gnawing doubt grew louder a part of him. I desperately wanted to believe that after nearly 3 decades together, Joanna would never betray him. Yet another portion couldn't ignore the uncomfortable clues, unable to address her. Harry chose to adopt a more cautious approach because his work commitments made it impossible to research on his own. So he hired a private detective. He felt horrible for resorting to such means, but he needed answers. The detective's report arrived 2 weeks later, and it hit Harry like a freight train. Joanna wasn't just seeing one man. She was seeing numerous. She had been seeing different men at restaurants and isolated parks, was always careful to cover her tracks. The images left little room for questioning. His wife was having a double life. Harry sat alone in his office, staring at the devastating evidence put out before him. A succession of hazy images showed Joanna laughing with a man at cafe, holding hands with another as they strolled across a park, and stepping into a hotel with a third. Of the betrayal felt like a dagger to the heart. For hours he fought with his feelings. He couldn't shake his feelings of rage, perplexity, and deep sadness as he remembered their shared history and the vows they had made, and the family they'd formed together. How had they come to this? What could have pushed Joanna to betray him in such a? He'd spent the last few days in a state of disbelief that Joanna wasn't only his wife, was his best friend, the mother of his children, and the woman he had shared over 3 decades of his life with. Harry was done, but she felt like a stranger tonight. He had made up his mind that there would be no more waiting, no more second guessing. It was time for answers, Joanna. She was in the kitchen as Harry went in, her back turned as she scrubbed vegetables for dinner. The sight of her so peaceful and domestic almost made him falter, but the storm of emotion churning around him propelled him on. "Joanna," he muttered, voice tight and strained. She turned, startled by his tone. "Harry, what's wrong?" He placed his briefcase on the table, his actions precise. "I know," he replied bluntly. "I know what you've been doing." Joanna froze, the color draining from her face, and laid the colander down, wiping her hands on a towel. "What are you talking about?" she inquired hesitantly. Harry. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table toward her, saying, "I hired someone to follow you, and they found out everything." Joanna's gaze flickered to the folder, but instead of opening it, she sighed and leaned against the counter, her expression unreadable. "Harry," she murmured softly, "you don't have to do this." Harry's hands curled into fists. "I didn't have to, Joanna. You've been lying to me about meeting other men. So how else was I supposed to?" "Oh, fine. Out they were simply meetings." Joanna said, her tone calmly, and measured nothing. Harry's voice was serious, but Rose's anger was rising up. "You've been dating other men. How is it not serious? How is it not cheating?" Joanna crossed her arms in a belligerent manner, saying, "Harry, listen to me. You and I have been together for a long time, and we have made a beautiful life, but I can't deny that it's become stagnant. Everything feels the same day after day. These talks are not about love or treachery. They're about feelings." "Alive again," Harry glanced at her, his head swirling. "Alive," and mimicked Joanna. You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now you're justifying it by saying it makes you feel alive." Joanna's cool exterior began to break, with fury seeping in. "Harry, I'm not trying to hurt you. I've been trying to find a way for us to move forward, which is why I think—" She hesitated, as if bracing herself. "I believe an open marriage could be the answer." Harry couldn't say anything for a time as he stared at her, startled by his open marriage. "Finally, you've been covertly dating other men, and now you're considering an open marriage only after I didn't tell you before, because I knew how you'd respond." Joanna shot out. "You're so inflexible, Harry. You'd never understood." Harry shook his head in disbelief. "You're right, I don't understand, and I don't agree, Joanna. This isn't a solution. It's treachery. I'm not wrecking our marriage." Joanna's rage boiled over. "Asking for your permission. I'm telling you how I feel. Our children are grown, and you and I are not getting any younger. I want to make the most of the time I have left to feel something again. This isn't about you. It's about me." Harry felt his. "This isn't the way to fix things, Joanna. It's selfish and wrong. If you continue on this path, you will destroy everything we have accomplished. I ask you to stop. Let us attempt to restore our marriage." But Joanna shook her head, her resolve resolute. "I made up my mind that I can't go back to the way things were. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I won't live the rest of my life feeling empty." Harry's voice was calm, but his words were weighted with finality. "Joanna, if you don't stop this, if you don't terminate these meetings and talk about an open marriage, I'll have no option but to file for divorce." Joanna's visage softened, but her resolution did not falter. She whispered quietly, "Do what you need to do, but I can't change how I feel." Harry stood there staring at the lady he thought he knew, the woman he had loved for nearly 30 years before you. To find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. He took a big breath, his voice softer, but no less serious. "Joanna," he began, "are you really ready to ruin everything we built? Think about Mark and Lisa. What would they say? We've been their example of stability their entire lives. Are you? Joanna, hey, were you willing to risk losing that to date other men? Sighed loudly, her shoulders sagging as she looked away. Harry, it's not that. Easy, she replied quietly. I'm struggling too. I don't want a divorce, but I can't ignore what I'm. Harry's jaw tightened as he thought he needed time to figure himself out. Was being pulled in two directions. His love for Joanna, which still burned despite everything, and the deep anguish. Her betrayal, fine. He said, finally, I'll give you time, but Joanna, I'm asking. No, I implore you to quit seeing these men. It degrades me as your husband. Is it normal? Joanna hesitated, her lips squeezing into a thin line she didn't want to make. Promises she couldn't keep, but the sight in Harry's eyes was equal parts wounded and desperate, so she nodded unwillingly, all right. She uttered her tone begrudgingly. I'll stop for now while I think about everything. Harry slumped back in his chair and rubbed his brow, the strain temporarily dissipating. He grabbed his glass of water and took a long sip, the cool liquid doing little to ease the turmoil. And alongside him, Joanna. He whispered softly, I don't want to lose what we've achieved, but what you've done is. A lot is more than a lot. It's a basis for divorce, and you're aware of this. Joanna snarled, her voice tinted with displeasure. I get it, Harry. You're saying just give me the month, let me work things out, and then we'll chat again for a bit. They sat in silence. The tension lingered like a storm cloud, but neither of them had the stamina to continue the debate. Harry nodded. Joanna carefully left the room, deciding to accept whatever small concession he could. Mumbling something about needing air, Harry was left alone with his thoughts the next morning. Harry's phone. He snatched it up and noticed it was his lawyer, Jake Ellison. Harry had been anticipating this call. Jake said in a calm tone that the divorce papers. Ready? Do you want to pick them up, or should I mail them to you? Harry hesitated, squeezing the phone securely. Send them to me, he said, but I don't want to serve them just yet. Give Joanna a month to think things out. I'm trying to save my marriage. Jake was silent for a minute. Understand, he said finally, I'll make a few changes to the papers, and a courier will send the documents to you this afternoon. Thanks, Harry murmured gently before hanging up and staring at his phone. With his fingers, wondering whether he was being foolish. Was Joanna even capable of coming back from this, or was he delaying? That evening, Harry sat at his workstation at home and glanced at the envelope provided by the courier. With his other hand, he took the folder with the evidence of treachery and opened the drawer to insert the documents inside. I'll wait a month, he thought, hoping Joanna will come to her senses. As he told himself, a small voice in the back of his mind murmured doubts. What if a month wasn't enough? And Joanna couldn't or wouldn't change for. Even though all Harry could do was wait for the following few days, Joanna acted as. Although nothing had changed, she went about her rituals with a practiced calm, speaking with Harry over breakfast. Clinging to hope, believe that maybe their chat had hit a chord. Joanna appeared less aloof, even smiling. When Lisa arrived on Tuesday for a brief break from college, Harry felt a rare gleam of optimism. Lisa's energy was. She brought warmth and joy into the house, something that had been missing for weeks, which she adored. Her father, and always turned to him as a source of knowledge and support, Harry thought her presence could assist. Joanna rediscovered what genuinely mattered for a few days, and it seemed to work. We ate supper together, talked about family vacations, and even watched one of Lisa's favorite movies, which Harry enjoyed. Every time, he quietly thanks Lisa for bridging the growing gap between him and Joanna. But Friday altered everything. Harry was in his office when his phone buzzed on his desk. He picked Lisa. He smiled, expecting a pleasant update or a request for guidance on her schooling. But when he heard her, Daddy, Lisa's voice began to tremble, and his heart fell. I was crying because I was sitting at your desk working on my project and needed a pen. I opened one of the drawers and found these papers. divorce papers, and a folder. Harry's stomach tightened when he saw images of his mother with other men. Damn it, he thought. Why didn't I take that folder to work? Lisa listened to me. Replied immediately, his voice steady but full of sadness. Please calm down. Mom and I are working through some challenges. It doesn't look like we can still repair this. Lisa's voice cracked. Great emotion, Daddy. Did Mom cheat on you? Did she betray us? Family. Harry sighs heavily. Scratching his temples, Lisa, he began carefully. Sometimes things like this happen in life, but your mom is going through a horrible period right now, a crisis that we discussed about it, and I trust things will get better. There was stillness on the line for a time before Lisa's voice tightened. If I had discovered this information even 20 minutes before, I would have challenged her myself. Harry's blood turned cold. He stood up straighter in his chair, alarm bells screaming in his mind. Wait, Lisa was your... Lisa responded angrily. Mom is usually at work on Fridays. Was here, but she departed a little while ago. She said she had a meeting, and I overheard her talking on the phone before she went. Harry's chest clenched. Something about Joanna's behavior didn't feel right, but before he could react, Lisa added, I believe I know where she went. Don't worry. Dad, I'm going to find out everything. Harry bolted upright, his voice shrill. Lisa, don't do something dumb. Tell me where she went. Too late, the line went dead. Harry tried calling Lisa back right away, and his fingers shaking as he pushed in her number. It rang and rang, but she didn't pick up. He tried again, his thoughts racing with dread, but there was no answer. Panic rose. He dialed Joanna's number, and the call went directly to voicemail. He clenched his teeth as his irritation grew. Was occurring? Why was Joanna's phone off? He paced his office, running a hand through his hair. His mind was a whirlwind of inquiries and worst-case scenarios. Had Joanna left? What had Lisa overheard? And what was his daughter planning to do? As the minutes dragged on, Harry tried to calm his anxieties. He hated feeling so helpless sitting in his office while two of the most significant ladies in his life were caught up in a web of secrets and emotions that appeared to develop. Tangled by the minute, he collapsed into his chair and stared at his phone, as if begging it to call Lisa. He thought, don't do anything you'll regret. But deep inside he knew that this was far. Something was building. He could feel it in his gut, and it was about to change everything. Harry's heart pounded as he raced home, the knot in his gut deepening with each passing second. He had told his boss he needed to leave due to a family situation, barely concealing the panic in his voice. The drive home seemed like an eternity. His mind was spinning with worst-case scenarios. Lisa wasn't picking up her phone. Neither was Joanna, and the silence between them gnawed at him when he arrived. The house was unnaturally quiet, with no trace of Joanna or Lisa. He shouted out for them. His shout echoed across the silent halls, but no response arrived. Desperately, he went to his office, hoping Lisa had left the folder and divorce papers behind. But when he opened the desk drawer, his heart fell. The folder and documents were gone. Harry ran, hand through his hair, grasping his head in irritation. What now, he thought. Couldn't avoid the impression that things were sliding farther out of control since his choice to leave the evidence at home had set off a chain of events that he could not control simply as he was. He was about to drop into his chair when his phone rang. The screen indicated an unusual number, and Harry frowned. Mr. Peterson responded, and the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. Officer Bradley of the county said in a calm, yet professional tone, Police Department, your wife and daughter are currently at the station. Harry's. The officer's hold on the phone tightened, and he hesitated. Before proceeding, your daughter produced a commotion at a nearby restaurant. She is currently in detention, although she is not under arrest, but we'd like it if you could come down to the station to settle things out. Harry's heart sunk and chilly. Sweat sprang out on his forehead. I'm on my way, he muttered, hanging up and racing. When Harry arrived at the police station, he immediately recognized Joanna, who was sitting in her arms folded and her face pallid. She stood in the corner of the waiting room opposite a man with a scratched face. Harry clenched his hands in a mix of fury and shame, recognizing him as one of the men from. Joanna noticed him and walked over, her eyes burning with accusation. "I can't believe that. You brought our daughter into this," she muttered, her voice quiet but furious. "How could you?" Harry's jaw tightened. "Close your mouth, Joanna," he yelled. "This is your fault for lying to me. You went on another date, and now our kid is caught in the middle of your mess." Joanna's lips opened like if dispute, but she closed it again, her lips squeezed into a narrow line, and glanced away. Speaking nothing, Harry raced past her to find Officer Bradley, who was waiting. Harry demanded, his voice strained, and the officer gestured for. Harry followed him into a secluded room, and once there, he explained, "Your daughter Lisa stepped inside the cafe where your wife and this other gentleman," paused, staring over his notes, "Mr. Collier, were having lunch." She produced a commotion. "Witnesses allege," she yelled at both of them before throwing a drink in Mr. Collier's. When he tried to calm her down, she scratched him. Harry sighed, rubbing his temples. "Where's her now?" "Check in a holding room," the officer said. "Filing charges. But we need to de-escalate the situation before releasing her." Harry nodded. "Can I see her?" The officer led Harry to a small room where Lisa sat on a bench, arms wrapped about herself, and her eyes were red. Her tear-streaked face was a hard sight for Harry to watch. "Lisa," he added. As he went in, she looked up, and new tears streamed down her cheeks. "Daddy," she gasped out. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't stand seeing her with that man. How could she do this to us?" Harry sat beside her, squeezing her tight. "Hug, it's okay, sweetheart," he muttered, while knowing nothing about the matter. "Okay, we'll get through this, but you can't take things into your own hands like." Lisa pushed back her fierce face. "She lied to you, Dad, betraying us, and she doesn't even care. I couldn't just stand by and let her do it." Harry's heart wrenched at the pain in his daughter's voice. "I know," he whispered quietly. "I understand how much it hurts, but we'll manage it together." "Okay, let me take care of." Lisa nodded hesitantly while wiping her eyes. Harry was sitting next to Lisa, the small antiseptic room of the police station, trying to console her when Officer Bradley walked in holding. Mr. Peterson. Bradley began with a stern yet professional face. "Your daughter produced quite a disturbance at the restaurant. I've studied the film, and I think you should see it." Harry nodded, his stomach nodding with dread. Officer Bradley placed the tablet on the table and launched the video. The grainy black and white camera shows Lisa storming inside the restaurant with intentional gestures. With a determined attitude, she recognized Joanna sitting at a table with Mr. Collier, the man. "Lean forward, Joanna," and spoke quietly as they shared a bottle of wine in the video. Then as Lisa approached them, a furious exchange followed. However, the film had no audio. Lisa motioned. Lisa's actions were aggressive and accusing toward Joanna at one point. Grabbed the divorce papers and photo out of her purse and flung them at Joanna. The argument escalated. Mr. CR stepped up and attempted to interfere, but Lisa focused her rage on him, jabbing her finger at his chest before clawing his face. The footage showed plates and glasses crashing as the pandemonium began. Patrons nearby scrambled. Bradley sighed and crossed his arms as the restaurant owner demanded he move out of the way when the movie concluded. An apology and financial recompense for the damages that Mr. Collier is considering pursuing a case for. He hasn't decided yet, but it could be helpful if your wife could persuade him out of it. Harry slumped back in his chair, with his hands clasped hard at his lap. The ramifications of what had transpired hit him like a ton of bricks. "I'll pay for the damage to the restaurant," he replied with a heavy voice. "I'll do whatever it takes to put this right." Bradley agreed. "That's a start, but you need to figure things out as a family." Drama has spilled out into the public, and it's not going to end well. Lisa's face pales and streaks. With tears, I began explaining as soon as the officer left the room, Dad. I overheard where Mom was going, but didn't realize she was going on a date until I discovered the paperwork in your desk. It made perfect sense when I came there and saw her with him. She was smiling, acting like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't betrayed you and Mark and me. It was awful. I couldn't just stand it. There, Harry laid a hand on her shoulder. Lisa, I understand, but taking it out on the restaurant and Mr. Collier wasn't the way to handle this. Lisa scowled as he viewed into our disagreement. I ordered him to get out of it, but he wouldn't back off, so I gave him a firm rejection. Harry sighed. The weight of, Lisa, don't be worried. I'll get you out of this mess. Everything will be okay, and we will talk about the rest at home. Just let me handle it in a few minutes, officer. Bradley arrived with some paperwork. Harry signed the forms and handed out his credit card details. As he was winding up, Joanna came in the corridor and was going towards them, but Lisa stopped. Don't you dare talk to me. Lisa spat, her voice shaking with wrath. You're the reason all of this occurred. Joanna flinched, but before she could react, Bradley increased his voice enough for everyone to quiet down. I'm not interested in your family. Drama, and this is still a police station. The tension in the air was apparent. Lisa bit her tongue, directing an angry gaze at Joanna. Harry placed a hand, Lisa's arm, pushing her toward the exit. Let's go, he murmured firmly. We'll deal with. At home, Joanna stayed behind to chat with Mr. Colley, who was sitting in, as Harry and Lisa left. He was in another room with an ice pack on his scratched face. Harry caught a glimpse of Mr. Collier pointing fiercely at Joanna, his look nasty. Joanna seemed to be pleading with him, most likely trying to convince him not to press charges. When Harry and Lisa returned home, there was tremendous quiet. Harry escorted Lisa to the living room and began brewing tea, thinking that it would help calm her down. Lisa sat stiffly on. When Harry returned with two, she was sitting on the couch with her hands clasped in her lap and her fury seething just beyond the surface. He placed a warm mug in front of Lisa and sat by her sip, urging. Carefully, you've been through a lot today. Lisa grabbed the mug, but instead of sipping, she glanced at the whirling steam, her eyes still red from sobbing. Dad, she whispered softly, heavy with emotion, I can't believe what she's done to us. Harry groaned and put reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know, baby, we'll get through this. Take it one step at a time. Half an hour later, the sound of the front door. The entrance astonished them both. Joanna strode in, pale but composed, carried a folder containing the divorce papers and images Lisa had flung into the restaurant and set it firmly on. I talked him out of making a complaint, and Joanna flatly said no. Looking at Lisa, but Hune seeking a couple thousand for the damage to his face, Harry leaned forward, his voice steady but cool. Fine, I'll pay. Email me his details. Joanna nodded curtly. Before she could leave the room, Lisa jumped to her feet, her rage reigniting. How can you stand there like that, Lisa? Screamed. How can you act like you're the victim? You deceived Dad, me, and Mark. Whole family, and now you're just worrying about paying off some guy. Joanna's calm shattered, and she went to Lisa. Her eyes blazed. You don't understand what I've been going through, she yelled. This isn't only about you or your father. It's about me, trying to find myself again after years of feeling invisible. Lisa's mouth sprang open, her face twisting in amazement. Invisible, that is. Your excuse, Mom. You've wrecked everything. How can you even say that after everything Dad has done for you? Joanna's eyes shifted to Harry, and she raised an accusatory finger at him. Know what, Harry? This is all your fault. You set her up to find those papers. Harry stood, his face dark with rage enough to make Joanna loathe me. Remarked, his voice low and furious. You promised to quit and told me you'd think about repairing this, but instead you kept sneaking around And now you're blaming me for your mess. Joanna opened her mouth to return, but Harry cut her off. This is over. I'm done. And the divorce is official, as you have seen. The papers. The room went silent for a while, the weight of Harry's words falling over all Joanna's lips. She shook as if she wanted to protest, but the fire in her eyes dimmed. Lisa, her own emotions boiling up, she went forward and cried, "Get out. You don't deserve to be here anymore, and you don't deserve us, Joanna. Don't talk to me like that, young girl. I'm still your mommy." Lisa shot back, "You stopped being my mother the moment you decided to betray." Joanna clenched her hands, her serenity falling completely fine. I snapped, "I'm leaving. I'll go to Sarah's." And she snatched her purse and marched toward the door. As she opened it, she turned back, her voice dripping with venom. "You turned her. Congratulations, Harry." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Harry and Lisa standing in the living room. The silence was almost deafening. Lisa's chest heaved. She attempted to regain her breath, and Harry placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said calmly. "She's gone. Let us just take a moment." But as Harry sat back down, he couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of what had just happened. Their family had been ripped apart, and no amount of words could fix. Harry experienced a whirlwind of emotions and legal proceedings in the weeks following Joanna's departure. True to his word, filed for divorce, Lisa remained by his side, offering her unwavering support despite her anger. Toward her mother burned brightly. She refused to speak with Joanna, brushing off every attempt at reconciliation. When he found out that Harry had reacted differently, he called him to express his support, pushed his father to maintain a semblance of civility with Joanna. Dad remarked on one of their late-night calls, "She's still Mom. I know she made errors, but we don't have to hate her forever. It's just not worth it." Harry respected Mark's level-headedness, though his own anguish was too acute to completely heed that advice. The divorce process was arduous for Harry and Joanna, with their lawyers managing the acrimonious conversations. Joanna, she seemed ready to fight tooth and nail for every last scrap, but she also sat silently, as if she had already lost everything important one afternoon during a Joanna surprised Harry at a particularly acrimonious discussion when their lawyers walked in. Joanna leaned across the table and talked softly to Harry. She began, her voice cracking. "Do you think we're making a mistake? Maybe we don't have to do this." Maybe. Harry cut her off, his tone calm but resolute. "No, Joanna. This isn't a mistake. This is the outcome of your decisions. I'm not going back to what we were." It's over. Her eyes swelled with tears, but she said nothing further. The divorce was finalized too. Months later, Harry walked out of the courthouse with a mix of relief and grief. He didn't glance back as Joanna sat on the courthouse steps, watching him leave. The chapter they had shared was closed. Joanna, nonetheless. For months, she couldn't let go so simply, blaming Harry for everything, especially putting Lisa up for divorce. Papers and images. She accused him of influencing their daughter against her. However, as time passed in her wrath, Joanna began to dwell on her own choices, and she began attending a psychotherapist to unravel the tangled. She gradually began to accept the feelings and decisions that had led to her betrayal. Confronting the reality was never easy, but taking responsibility for her role in the family's downfall was important. Joanna made several attempts to reconnect with Lisa, but Lisa stayed cold. Every call, every text, every visit was treated with polite apathy or outright rejection. But Joanna did not give up. She continued, reaching out by mailing birthday cards, writing long messages, and asking mutual. After months of acting as an intermediary, Lisa eventually she softened and agreed to meet Joanna for coffee, albeit their discussion was uncomfortable and careful, but it was a start. With time, the walls Lisa had created began to Despite the fact that their relationship would never entirely mend, it became cordial, even warm, one day over a year later. The divorce Harry received a letter from Joanna. Her handwriting was neat, the tone measured but vulnerable. Dear Harry, I've spent the past year thinking about everything. I tried to blame you for the way I hurt you and our family for so long. Lisa, anyone but myself. But the truth is that it was my fault. I made choices that destroyed what we built together, and I have to live with that. I'm so sorry, Harry, for betraying you. Breaking our family, you were a good husband, a better man than I deserved. I've been working on myself to understand why I did what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm truly sorry. Thank you for the years we had. I hope you find happiness. Joanna. Harry read the letter twice, then a third time. His emotions swirled with anger, sadness, and fainting. That night, in a moment of closure, he wrote back to Joanna, thanking her for her letter. I appreciate your apology. I do not hold a grudge against you, but forgiveness is a different matter. What happened between us cut too deeply for me to forget. I've moved on, and I hope you find peace. Well, for the sake of our children, I hope you can rebuild your relationship with them. Take care, Harry. He mailed the letter the next morning and felt a strange sense of relief that it was the final piece of their story, a quiet epilogue, a life they once shared. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a good mood. Good luck.